October 27, 1962. 200 feet beneath the churning waters of the Sargasso Sea, inside the Soviet Foxtrot-class submarine B-59, Vasili Arkhipov is standing in air that has become almost poisonous. The interior temperature has climbed toward 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Carbon dioxide is rising, the batteries are dying, and roughly 70 sailors are gasping for oxygen in a dark, humid hull that smells of sweat, spilled diesel, and the metallic tang of fear. Above them, US Navy ships are dropping signaling charges, thunderous claps of metal on water that sound to the men in the hull like the world is being crushed by a god. Arkhipov does not know it yet, but the three exhausted officers in the command center are about to hold the survival of everything you have ever loved in their dirty, shaking hands. For the men inside B-59, the Cuban Missile Crisis is not a television speech or a diplomatic chess match. It is heat, darkness, sonar. Metal explosions above their heads. The submarine has been cut off from Moscow for days. The crew does not know whether negotiations are still happening, whether the blockade has turned into war, or whether the first nuclear exchange has already begun on the surface. All they know is that American ships have found them, and the hull is shaking. That is the nightmare at the center of this story. The most dangerous moment of the Cuban Missile Crisis does not happen in the White House. It does not happen in the Kremlin. It happens inside a diesel-electric submarine that was never designed for the tropics, with exhausted men breathing poisoned air and trying to interpret explosions they cannot see. The world almost ends because of a simple misunderstanding about a signal. Between extinction and survival stood three officers, one locked safe, and one vote no machine could make for them. October the 27th, 1962. The B-59 was part of a secret task force of 4 submarines sent toward Cuba to provide a hidden naval shield for the Soviet missiles being installed on the island. These Foxtrots were workhorses of the Northern Fleet, 300 feet of steel built for colder waters, not the Caribbean. They had no internal air conditioning. As they moved south, the sun began to cook the hull. Inside, the metal walls became too hot to touch. Sailors fanned themselves with navigation charts. Men fainted at their stations. Fresh water was rationed, and the humidity turned every surface into a damp, claustrophobic skin. But there was a deeper, more lethal secret on board the B-59 that only the most senior officers were allowed to know. Locked in a lead-lined safe in the forward torpedo room was a special weapon. A 10-kiloton nuclear torpedo. It had the destructive power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima, and the orders for its use were dangerously, almost criminally vague. If the senior officers believed the submarine was under direct attack and could not reach Moscow for confirmation, they could authorize the weapon themselves. It was a hair-trigger protocol designed for a war that had already started, being applied to a crisis that was still desperately trying to remain cold. And before the crisis was over, that weapon would be ordered out of the realm of theory. The man in command was Captain Vitaly Savitsky. He was a veteran, decorated officer, but by October the 27th, he was at the absolute end of his physical and mental endurance. He had been evading a massive US Navy hunt for days, forced to remain submerged for heroic lengths of time to avoid being spotted by planes. The batteries were running dangerously low. The noise of the American sonar, a constant high-pitched pinging that reverberated through the hull, was driving the men to the edge of psychosis. It was like being trapped inside a giant metal bell that someone was hitting with a sledgehammer every few seconds for 72 hours of sleepless darkness. Above them, the US Navy was executing a quarantine, a naval blockade of Cuba. They were using specialized signaling depth charges. These were small devices, roughly the size of a hand grenade, intended to sound a clear knock on the hull to tell the Soviet submarine to surface and identify itself. To the American sailors on the surface, these were practice devices, harmless signals in a dangerous game. But to the men inside the B-59 who couldn't see the ships and were gasping for air in 100+ degree heat, the explosions sounded like a full-scale assault. They heard the hull groaning and weeping under the shockwaves. They felt the vibrations rattling their teeth. They were convinced that World War III had already begun on the surface, and that they were the first casualties of the first exchange. Finally, Captain Savitsky snapped. In the blistering, airless heat of the conning tower, surrounded by the smell of his own dying crew, he gave the final order. Assemble the special weapon. He was pathologically convinced that his boat was being destroyed, and that he had a duty to take as many of the enemy with him as possible. He shouted to his officers, "We're going to blast them now. We will die, but we will sink them all. We will not disgrace our Navy or the Soviet people." According to the strict nuclear protocol of the era, a launch required the unanimous agreement of 3 specific officers: the captain, the political officer, and the chief of staff. The political officer, Ivan Maslenikov, his mind blurred by the heat and the propaganda of the era, immediately concurred. The countdown to a nuclear exchange that would have likely triggered a global, civilization-ending response was down to the last person in the room. That man was Vasili Arkhipov. He was the second captain and the chief of staff of the entire submarine flotilla. He was a man of extraordinary, quiet pedigree. Just a year earlier, he had been the executive officer on the K-19, the infamous Hiroshima submarine. He had lived through a reactor accident that exposed crewmen to severe radiation and forced sailors into a desperate fight to prevent catastrophe. Arkhipov had seen the real face of a nuclear disaster, and he carried the weight of that experience into the conning tower of the B-59. While Savitsky was overwhelmed by the immediate rage of the hunt, Arkhipov remained chillingly calm. He didn't just disagree. He challenged Savitsky's entire perception of reality. In the suffocating dark, he argued that the Americans weren't trying to sink them. He pointed out the obvious. If the US Navy wanted to destroy a submerged Foxtrot, they would have done it with a real depth charge, and the B-59 would already be at the bottom of the sea. He suggested that the charges were a signal, a crude but clear request to talk. It was an act of incredible psychological defiance. In the rigid, paranoid hierarchy of the Soviet Navy, challenging your captain's battle orders during a perceived attack was nearly unthinkable. But Arkhipov knew that once that torpedo was fired, there would be no more orders to follow, and no world left to give them. The argument in the conning tower lasted for what felt like several lifetimes, though it was likely only a few minutes. The oxygen levels were dropping so low that some of the officers were beginning to slip into unconsciousness or hallucination. Finally, through sheer force of personality and the logic of a man who had already faced death in a reactor core, Arkhipov won. He persuaded Savitsky to surface the submarine and wait for contact. As the B-59 finally broke the surface of the Sargasso Sea and the hatches were thrown open, the crew was greeted by the incredible, miraculous sight of 11 US destroyers and the fresh, cool, life-giving air of the Atlantic dawn. There was no nuclear war. There were no burning cities. There was only a mutual realization of how close the species had come to its end. The return to the Soviet Union was anything but a hero's welcome. The High Command in Moscow was profoundly embarrassed that their secret mission had been discovered, and that their submarines had been forced to surface by the Americans. At a cold official debriefing in Moscow, one high-ranking admiral looked the exhausted crew in the eyes and said, "It would have been better if you had gone down with your ship." The story of the nuclear torpedo and Arkhipov's intervention was buried deep in the classified archives of the Navy and the KGB, hidden away for 40 years. It wasn't until the year 2002, at a major conference in Havana marking the 40th anniversary of the crisis, that the full, terrifying story finally emerged into the public light. Thomas Blanton, the director of the US National Security Archive, famously stated after reviewing the declassified documents, "A guy named Vasili Arkhipov saved the world." The revelation shocked historians and policymakers alike. It proved that the Cuban Missile Crisis wasn't just a high-level chess game between Kennedy and Khrushchev. It was a series of volatile human variables that nearly spiraled out of control because of a loose wire, a hot conning tower, and a misunderstood signal. In 2026, as nuclear planners confront shorter warning times, hypersonic delivery systems, and AI-assisted early warning tools, the lesson of Arkhipov is frequently cited as the ultimate warning. The danger is not that machines have already taken over the button. It is that every new layer of speed can make human doubt feel like a delay instead of a safeguard. But an artificial intelligence doesn't have the memory of the K-19 reactor core. It doesn't have the capacity for intuitive doubt. It doesn't have the ability to say no to its own sensors when they tell it. But the world is on fire. The Arkhipov variable, the human capacity for skepticism, is the one thing the modern brink can least afford to lose. Consider the immense physical toll of that night in 1962. When the B-59 finally surfaced, American pilots described the Soviet sailors as looking like walking statues made of grey salt. Their skin was covered in weeping rashes and infections. They were severely malnourished, sleep-deprived, and semi-conscious from carbon dioxide poisoning. This is the state of mind that was holding the keys to the nuclear age. It is a testament to the incredible resilience of the human spirit under extreme pressure, and a reminder that the most fragile part of deterrence is often the human body, forced to carry it. Vasili Arkhipov died in 1998 from kidney cancer, and some accounts have linked his illness to the radiation exposure he suffered during the K-19 accident. He never sought fame, he never wrote a memoir, and he never called himself a hero. When people asked him about those days, he simply said that he did his duty as he saw it. But his duty became one of the most consequential acts of restraint in modern history. He was the man who kept the fire in the silo and the world in the sun. He is one reason you are listening to this right now. The story of Arkhipov is a reminder that we are here not because of the perfection of our technology, but because of the courage of individuals to doubt it when the stakes are highest. We must remember the man in the hot conning tower of the B-59. We must remember the irreplaceable value of the no. Subscribe to Turning Point Histories so you don't miss the next chapter. New videos every week. In the next video, we leave the ocean and go to the skies over Sakhalin Island. 269 civilians, one Soviet fighter pilot, one trigger pull that pushed two superpowers to the edge of nuclear war. Stay tuned for KAL-007, the plane that nearly started World War III. The Sargasso Sea. One nuclear torpedo, 3 officers, 1 refusal, 1 world left. Stay with us.